Hello and welcome. My cat is here. Anyway, so today I'm going to be talking about something that I get a lot of questions about, which is how can I have cats and rats at the same time in the same house? Now, this is something that a lot of people struggle with. It's one of the most common reasons I see people rehoming their rats is because they either got a cat or they're moving to a place that has a cat. Somehow cat's involved and they think that they can't have both a cat and rats. So let's talk about it because obviously I have both. I currently have 4 cats. I've had cats my entire life and I've had rats for 16 years. I've had both of them simultaneously that entire time. The most cats I've had is 6 and obviously I have a ton of rats right now. So how do I do it? How is it a thing? And it's not as complicated as I fear people think it's going to be. First of all, yes, you do need to keep your cats and your rats separated. Cats are a predator and rats are prey. In fact, rats are a very main source of prey for cats. So keeping them in the same room, like loose together, is not really an option. Your cat does not want to meet your rat does not want to meet your cat. Even if your cat is currently very low prey drive, doesn't really care about the rat, it's still not okay because it takes 1 second for that cat to just get annoyed and swipe at the rat, and then that rat could be severely injured. And one thing to keep in mind is cats have a ton of bacteria in their mouths and on their claws. So any injury that your cat does to your rat could cause them to get an infection and die from that infection. So even if your cat has a low prey drive, it takes them 1 second of getting annoyed, because we all know when a cat gets annoyed, they bop ya. They do that one time with a rat and it could severely injure them. They could lose an eye, they could lose limbs, they can lose their life. So even if your cat seems like they're perfectly chill, like they don't care about your rats at all, I highly recommend not allowing them to meet because it can end very poorly. So how do you keep your rat safe? That is the main question people have, is how do you keep your rat safe? So your cat's prey drive is a factor because some cats are going to have a very low... Ignore Betty, she's in heat, but she's getting spayed tomorrow, so that's the last time I'm going to have to say that. But so your cat's prey drive is a factor. So some cats do have a very low prey drive and they're just not interested in the rats at all. It's very easy to keep them safe that way. If your cat has a higher prey drive, it can complicate things a little bit, and I'll get into that. But let's start with the basics. You want them to have a secure cage. And by secure, I mean something that the rat cannot get out of and the cat cannot get into. Now cats, I think people are under the impression that cats have like some kind of evil magic within them that allows them to bust into cages. So like if you have like a critter... August has turned my air purifier on twice now. So if you have a cage like a Critter Nation, like this one that has this kind of door opening where you have to squeeze with your thumb and your forefinger, that basically means the cat cannot get in. I've heard some people worry that a cat would be able to squeeze those. Even if your cat had the ability to reason out that that's what they're supposed to do, that they're supposed to take their paws like this and squeeze it down, they don't have the strength to do that. And if they do, I would recommend putting them in a circle of salt and calling an exorcist, because they're not a normal cat. So I wouldn't worry about that. Basically, you just want that to be where they can't grab it. So like, if you have one of these cages, for example, my preview, where you just pull the door open, you need to make sure your cat can't just like pop it open, because that is something a cat can learn pretty easily. So if you do have a cage like that, make sure it has a lock, which is either going to be, sometimes they come with them, like the preview has a little extra bar that you wrap around it. And most of those cages, that is how you close it, where you just wrap the top bar around the handles. But if it's a cage that does not have that, I would recommend getting a some kind of clip, like a carabiner, and just closing it that way, because that's going to make it a lot easier on you and a lot safer for both the rat not escaping and to prevent the cat from getting in there. The other thing is bar spacing. So sometimes you'll see people who have male rats that decide to have 1-inch bar spacing, because an adult male rat is very rarely able to squeeze through 1-inch bar spacing. I would always recommend, regardless of if you have males or females, adults or babies, to get 1/2-inch bar spacing, because 1 inch bar spacing, if you have a large cat, they can't get their paw in there, but if you have a smaller cat, they absolutely can. And if they can get their paw in there, they can swipe at them and it can injure them. For the most part, that's not something I'd worry too much about. But if you have a cat that has a high prey drive, I would highly recommend making sure that you have 1/2 inch bar spacing, just to ensure that they're not going to even attempt it. Another factor is the size of your rats. So I have noticed with my cats, they are way more interested in the dwarf rats than my standard size rats. So if you have like large, lazy male rats, they're not going to attract as much attention as if you have dwarfs. So if you're considering getting rats and you have cats that have a high prey drive, maybe steer away from dwarfs if you're really, really worried about it. But again, if you have a secure cage, it's not that much of a worry. It's just a matter of managing your anxiety as well as keeping your pet safe. Next thing, let's talk about secure rooms. So as you can see, my rats, most of my rats, I have a cage that's out in the living room, but most of my rats live in my bedroom with me, and my cats are allowed in my bedroom. With a caveat, they're allowed in my bedroom if I am home and if I am in the room. So if I am going to leave, I kick all the cats out and I close the door. And I do that because then I know the rats are fine. They're safe. Nothing's going to bother them. And if you leave the door open, that is when things can go wrong. So if you have a secure cage and the rats have not escaped, you don't really have to worry too much about what your cat can do to them. But rats like to let their little tails dangle out of the cage. And when I see that, I always go over to them and I say, put this away. And I like pet their tail until I pull it back in. And that is where the real danger is, because a tail is exactly the kind of thing that's designed to get a cat's attention. They're a predator, and that is their prey, and they can see that as a way to catch them, is the tail. So you want to make sure that the cat cannot get their tails. Most times, it's not something I worry too much about. If you're really worried about it, I would just limit the number of lounging spaces they have by the bars. So like, or at least low down on the bars. Your cat's probably not gonna be able to, well, your cat probably won't be able to jump that high and grab their tails, but they might be able to. So if you're really worried about it, I would forego things like door hammocks and go with things like just ledges, like that are branches, stuff like that. Something your rat's not gonna sit on for very long. If you have a spare room that can just be a rat room, that's even better, because you can just keep that door closed whenever you're not in there. And then when you're free roaming them, obviously just don't have your cat out. And if you have a cat that does have a high prey drive, so like let's talk about August. August has a high prey drive. She's the only one of the cats that does, and she has a unfortunately very high prey drive. And so with her, I used to, when I was doing their waters, I would take some of the rats out and let them ride on my shoulder and go to the bathroom with them. And I had to stop doing that. Not because August was targeting them at these points, but because I could see how she could. Because their tails would hang down my back or down my front. And if she saw that, I know she would go for it. So I stopped doing that. So like, obviously, I do not let them around the rats when the rats are out. I do not have the rats out around them. And even when I'm doing things like meds, I make sure, she's about to rub up on that. Augie. And yeah, and even when I'm doing things like meds, I make sure they're nowhere near the cage before I open the door, because it takes no time for a cat to injure a rat. So just caution, basically. Make sure that the cat is not in the room when the rats are out. And if you have a cat with a high prey drive and you're giving them meds, be vigilant. Keep an eye on the cat. And now the other thing I feel like people worry about is the rats and how they feel being around a predator. And this can be a factor with your rats. So I would pay attention to them. So the thing with like a critter nation is it's fairly low to the ground, the bottom part of it. And you'll sometimes notice your rats reacting to things that are low to the ground. Specifically with like a single story critter nation. I noticed with my rats when they were babies and I'd have them in my baby cage, which is a single story critter nation, sometimes they'd react to like even seeing my feet moving on the ground because they were lower. And then I would get them into a double and they'd spend more time higher up and they'd calm down. So if you have a cage that can be propped up on a table, I would suggest doing that. Or if you have a cage like a single story critter nation, I just suggest paying attention to them, and if they seem reactive when they see things moving down here, I just honestly suggest upgrading them to a double if you can. I do understand that that's a high cost, but if you can upgrade them, it can be very beneficial to your rats. If you're looking into getting rats and you're wondering what kind of cage you should get, if you should get a single or a double, in general, I recommend a double over a single because it's more space, and even for 2 rats, I find that the double is fine. It's not too much space for even 2. Some people say it might be, but I don't think that's necessarily a problem. And now finally, let's talk about if you cannot keep your rats in a secure room or you cannot keep the cats out of the room, how do you make sure that the rat is safe? And that's also not as hard as you might think, which is a barrier around the bottom of the cage. I'll pop up a picture of the one I had out in the living room because, again, August has a high prey drive. And so it's just a cardboard box. It's just a large cardboard box because the bedding I get, so if you also get a huge bale of bedding, like a thing of Aspen or something like that, or if you have like other small pets and you get like hay that comes in a giant box, I break the box down and I tape it up and I just make a skirt around the cage and prevents the cats from being able to reach the rats. I've also done it with 2 puppy gates. It's like I had rats that were kind of in a corner and I just took 2 puppy gates and I stretched them out completely and zip tied them and just made a barrier like that because it was at an angle enough that the cats could not reach the rats. So you can do it with those 2 things. You can also get those plastic panels or even the grid panels that people use for guinea pig cages, and you can make a grid around that or a barrier around that. And if you do that, I suggest coming up to about like this point, like the halfway, a little less than halfway point of the critter nation, and make sure it's something that you can easily move so that you can get into the cage. And I found that with me and my cages, that has always been successful, is just making a little skirt to go around their cage to make sure that the cats cannot get too close. And I do also find that if they can't get too close, then they become less interested in that cage in particular. And the last factor is time. Some cats get bored with rats over time and they will find less interest in their cages. And if that is the case, awesome. I still recommend never letting them out in the room together. They're never letting them interact, but it is good if they can learn to ignore the rats. So yeah, those are some tips on how to have cats and rats. Again, if you're really, really worried, I would just recommend making a skirt for your cage so that the cat cannot get too close. I've never tried the like panels, the like plastic playpen panels or the guinea pig cage panels, but I imagine that would work pretty well, especially since it'd be pretty sturdy. And you can even put something like bells on it so that if the cat is trying to get through it, you can hear it and come over and see what's going on. But again, of my cats that I've had over the years, I've had 2 that had a high prey drive and the rest had a pretty low prey drive. Dax has, I say, a medium one. She's not as focused on them as August is. August is annoying, to be honest. But most cats I feel are going to have medium prey drive, which means they'll get used to the rats and eventually stop harassing them. But yes, so those are my tips on how to have both cats and rats. One additional thing that I just wanted to mention is a lot of people get more concerned that the rat is going to get hurt, which is fair because they are a prey animal. And they never seem to consider that the cat could get hurt, which is true, because a rat can and will defend their territory if they feel as if they are in danger. So, for those of you who don't know, rats can reach the bars and grab a cat. So I've seen this happen where it's like almost looks like they're punching them. And they're trying to grab them so that they can pull them closer to the bars to bite them. And rats can bite through the bars, especially if you have 1-inch bar spacing. They can get a good chunk of their little nose through there. And if a cat's too close, they can easily bite your cat's nose or paws. And that can be very painful and injure your cat. So keep that in mind as well. It's a very good reason to have 1/2-inch bar spacing. So it's not just for the rat safety, but it's also for the cats. I hope that was helpful to you, or if it was entertaining if you're just here to watch. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!